check, get some water for you? Oh, for you? Yeah. Sound.
Yes, please. It is a privilege to welcome you all tonight to our annual Rose Feinberg Lecture. Since 1982, this Israel-centered program has served as a living tribute to a woman who possessed a great love of Israel and Jewish learning. Rose was a religious school teacher at Temple Israel for more than two decades, and this year's lecturer, fittingly, is a graduate of our religious school. In the book, How Great Women Lead, Seeds of Peace Executive Director Adelson Lewin is profiled along with Hillary Clinton, Condoleezza Rice, Sheryl Sandberg, and 17 other leaders by Olympic medalist Bonnie St. John and her daughter Darcy Dean. This book was published in 2012, and its writers traveled to the Seeds of Peace International Camp in Maine to interview Leslie about her leadership style and watch her navigate the challenges of bringing together 170 teenagers from conflict regions while supervising dozens of staff and volunteers. Carol Michael and I visited the Seeds of Peace camp this past summer, and we observed exactly what is described in the book. So I quote, "With her dark brown hair pulled back into a bouncy ponytail, the ever-present Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup and freckles dancing across her face, Leslie looks almost as young and optimistic as the counselors and campers she leads. Part camp director, part mother hen, part world-class diplomat, Leslie's dynamic spirit is the spark that keeps this amazing place going year after year." And the authors continue, "Leslie is such an effective leader because she teaches with her actions. She exudes the attitude that she wants the other staffers and campers to share." I first experienced this incredible attitude and Leslie's dynamic spirit on a boat. We used to hold our sixth grade Kala on Thompson's Island in the middle of Boston Harbor. When I was in 12th grade, I served as a madrich or counselor on Leslie's sixth grade Kala. Even though it was a short drive from the temple to the dock in South Boston, it took some collaboration to move everything and everyone off of the bus onto the boat and from the boat onto the island and into the dormitory there. Leslie took a leadership role in helping to move the group from one type of transportation to the next. And I remember being struck by her maturity and her capacity to build relationships with older students and adults, while simultaneously being respected and loved by her peers. Leslie and I next encountered one another when I returned to Temple Israel after college to be youth director, and Leslie was in the 11th and 12th grades. It was during this period that the foundation of our more than 20 years of friendship was poured. As a teen leader of RYFTI, she served as the youth group's president in her senior year of high school. Leslie approached the task of creating powerful educational and social experiences for her peers with great competence, wisdom, and a tremendous sense of fun. Leslie has, of course, accomplished a lot since finishing the high school program at Temple Israel and leaving her childhood home in Newton. She is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and received a master's degree in public administration and nonprofit management and policy from New York University. Before becoming executive director of Seeds of Peace, she served as a counselor and then camp director, and, most importantly, it was at camp that she met a fellow counselor, Nick Lewin, who is now her husband. Nick is an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, and he, Leslie, and their children, Sam and Molly, live in Brooklyn. Leslie, we are thrilled that you are here tonight and are also so thankful to your parents and our long-term members, Steve and Anita Adelson, for bringing you into this community. And is Julie here as well? No? All right. I'll tell Julie I said this about her, would you? It's good, too, that Julie is also a cherished graduate of our school and who, like all siblings, has played a significant role in shaping who you, Leslie, have become. And although I've never had the good fortune to witness your interactions with Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton or Condoleezza Rice or the Prime Minister of Ireland or Mahmoud Abbas or Shimon Peres, just to name a few, I imagine what they have seen and encountered when meeting you is what so many of us here tonight have long seen in you and experienced when with you. An authentic individual who treats all as equals and builds genuine relationships with perception and humor. A leader who exercises her tremendous capacity to put the needs of the group or cause ahead of her own. You are demonstrating this particular attribute tonight by sharing your presentation with two of your respected colleagues and good friends, Tomer Perry and Alia Lalu. Leslie, you have become an extraordinary leader and a great friend. And on behalf of my clergy colleagues who have known and loved you too for all of these years and have been privileged, as I have, to watch and participate in the unfolding of your life, on behalf of my clergy partners, I'm filled with pride to welcome you to this bima.
Good evening. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Jeremy, for a very touching introduction. And thanks to all of you for including me and including Seeds of Peace in your program here tonight. This is, for me, quite a homecoming, as Jeremy alluded to. My sister and I proudly schlepped here from Newton as we were fifth generation of our family to be members and be part of Temple Israel, and that continues to mean a lot to my parents and to us. So it's wonderful to be standing here again, a place where I think I last stood at my bat mitzvah, and I'm proud not to be wearing a ponytail and not to be wearing the teal dress that I wore that day that might have been fashionable then, but is clearly not so much anymore. And I'm proud to be here discussing Seeds of Peace and the work that we do in the region, and have followed with great admiration the curriculum that I've seen this temple undertake and the travel I've seen the temple undertake in exploring what is obviously a very difficult, very complicated issue that everybody here tonight and everybody in our Seeds of Peace community feels oh so deeply about. And I look forward to expanding your thoughts on this region of the world through our story at Seeds of Peace, through my story, and through that of Tomer and Alia, who I'm going to call up to join in with me in just a second. At Temple Israel, I learned at an early age the importance of values, real values that you can live by, and the importance of community. And those are two themes that are obviously incredibly strong in our work at Seeds of Peace, that we rely on, that we struggle to define, but that we rely on in the difficult work that we aim to do in bringing people together. And of course, I feel like tonight is extra timely, given what we read in the news these days about a hypothetical peace process, a term that I don't use lightly, but clearly there's a lot of momentum in this region. There's a lot of noble work being done by John Kerry and his team, and a lot of talk about what could be. And for us, that it's clear that that's a moment, even though the what and the details remain undefined. And we're sitting here with great angst, trying to understand what our next steps could and might be. It's clear that there is a moment. And for me and for us at Seeds of Peace, that's a moment to take very seriously. Even though that moment is different here for those of us in Boston or Brooklyn than it may be for our friends in Ramallah or Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. It is something. And I heard last night Alon Pincus, a former Israeli diplomat who briefed our board at a meeting yesterday in New York and said he feels like this is a moment that may not come again for a really long time, that he is equally in admiration of the work of John Kerry and fears that if this does not succeed, it would be a long time before the U.S. and other governments would invest such energy and such resources into trying to make a difference in a region that we care about. So for me, that makes this moment even greater and even more important. And this moment also stresses for us the importance of courage and the importance of leadership, two of the values that we hold extra dear at Seeds of Peace, and two things that I want to explain to you through the lens of our work. Because with courage and with leadership is when we will and can see change in this region, and it's courage and leadership that I argue is lacking and that we're looking for, and it is on that premise that Seeds of Peace was founded. Seeds of Peace has enjoyed a beautiful relationship with Temple Israel for as long as I can remember, sharing many friends and counselors, wooing many of your clergy to perform weddings for certain people on the premises, and sending many others from the religious school here to be participants in our American Seeds program, and many other moments of synergy that I'm incredibly proud of and that I hope will continue based on the conversation we're having here tonight. Seeds of Peace started in 1993 as an experiment. 1993 was a very different time than it is today. The hope that we struggle to find now was much more real then. In light of the Oslo Accords, there was a much more favorable conversation around peace. It was not nearly as difficult as it is today. Seeds of Peace was founded by a man named John Wallach, who was a journalist, and he had a very simple premise. As an American, he was able with ease to meet Israelis and meet Palestinians. And he grew deeply frustrated by the fact that they had no ability to meet each other. He saw no opportunity for change if young Israelis and young Palestinians were inheriting notions of the other, inheriting hatred of the other, based on what they were hearing, based on what they were reading, and without any opportunity to make their own judgments, to create their own relationships. And regardless of what peace process may or may not come forth out of paper, on paper, in the weeks or months or years ahead, regardless of what the words are, the people are going to need to learn to live together, and they're going to need to learn to understand one another, respect one another, and appreciate one another. And it was on that premise, while John's son was away at summer camp, a moment and an experience that I can guess many of you in this room have shared, the power of summer camp and the power of relationships that can be formed there, where John ventured to bring together young Israelis and Palestinians. The idea that they could be together in the remote woods of Maine, share a bunk, share a meal, and share in conversation. And what would that do? What kind of difference could we make in generations of young Israelis and young Palestinians if they had the opportunity to have these direct conversations, to form relationships instead of inheriting and assuming? I'm proud to say today that it was an experiment that worked, not without challenges, and continues to challenge us to stay relevant and to be relevant in the lives of young Israelis and Palestinians. But from that moment of Seeds of Peace as a simple summer camp, we have grown into a complex and substantive organization, working still primarily in the Middle East, but also in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and here in the United States, and working on the long-term investment that we need to create young people with a different understanding of one another, a different sense of a different skill set and different set of relationships that will allow them to work together, understand one another, and lead us to a new generation. And we are incredibly proud to have worked with thousands of some of the smartest, we get lucky, our selection process is excellent, some of the smartest young people that these regions have to offer, and to be able to provide them a transformational experience at an individual level that can translate into a transformational experience at a community level that I hope will translate and is translating to a transformational experience at a much broader societal level. It is our goal now, and we are to continue to infuse the pipeline, but also to continue to amplify the voices of young people that are rising, no longer young, I should say, and you'll hear from them in a moment, who are rising into positions of influence, and to what once was a lens of creating future presidents and prime ministers, which is still an important lens, is broadening to a lens of creating journalists, academics, politicians, businessmen, lawyers, teachers, parents, who have a different understanding, a different set of skills, and a different network with which they are approaching their region, their communities, their homes, and their families. For me, this is a great sense of hope. And even though our work seems to get more and more difficult, the stories and the seeds, they're always seeds despite how old they get, and the reach that they have is a reason for all of us to be hopeful. As I watch Lior, an Israeli graduate of Seeds of Peace, who's now a lead anchor on Channel 2 in Israel, talk to us about the way in which he covers news in Israel. How when he covers the war in Gaza, it means something different to him, that there are people in Gaza that he considers friends, that he knows, that he's spoken to. For Gil Messing, another Israeli seed of ours who spent many years working closely with Tzipi Livni, one of the lead Israeli negotiators, and the role and the voice that he felt was his responsibility to represent. For our Egyptian seeds who are leading town dialogues to process the revolution, and to one of our oldest Egyptian seeds who sat on the team redrafting the newly established Egyptian constitution over the last 2.5 years. The voices, it is our responsibility to amplify these voices as a generation of young people who are leading us to a different tomorrow, who give all of us a reason to be hopeful and who will navigate for us a path to a different future. And what's different, there are many organizations tackling this conflict in very unique and in special ways and trying to bring together moments of conversation. And for me, what's always differentiated Seeds of Peace, and what was the title of this talk for a reason, is the importance that we place on the role of dialogue and direct conversation. The ability to sit, Israelis and Palestinians, in a room and have the most difficult conversations you could imagine on the issues, the ways in which your family and your daily life is impacted by this conflict, is simply not happening enough and is life-changing for those in the room. You don't have to get to an agreement, but I argue you are forever impacted by the story of the other, as hopeful or as difficult or wherever on the spectrum as it is. And it is those moments in dialogue, for us, a very sacred part of our curriculum, happening 90 minutes every day at camp, and a critical part of all of the follow-up work we do back in their regions. That is the most difficult and most important work that we do. And it's on that note that I'd love to invite Tomer and Alia up to join me here, please, who are both graduates of Seeds of Peace and both also working as facilitators in our programs, to share with you in a bit more detail the role of dialogue within our work at Seeds.
All right, good evening. Shabbat Shalom. Can you guys hear me okay? So I was introduced as Alia, which is what people in the US call me, but my name is Alia actually, which is probably a term that's familiar to a lot of you. La'allot, right? Aliyah. And in Arabic, it means high, something that's high. So Alia, that's my name. And it's an honor for me to be here. Everything that was said about Leslie earlier is true. Thanks. And I was a camper when I was 14. Leslie was the camp director. And now 11 years later, I'm honored and lucky to call her my boss, and I get to see her every day. So let's give it up for Leslie one more time. And to the leadership of Temple Israel here for everything you're trying to accomplish. This is hard. This is very hard work that we do. And a lot of people will try to sugarcoat it for you. You know, let's meet the other and everything's going to be okay. You know, peace, love, kumbaya, let's hold hands and let's sing some songs and everything's going to be okay. And that's not true. And if you see a program like that, you have to dig a little bit deeper to see what's happening. Encounter is difficult. Let's see, raise your hand if you've ever met someone who's challenged you. Challenged the worldview, challenged something that you held, a belief that you held forever, right? And that's what happens at camp. You show up, you're 14, or maybe you're 25, or maybe, you know, you're 85, you're still meeting people who are challenging you every day. And the reason that you're able to be challenged is because you're encouraged or forced or whatever it is to see the other person as a human. And it's not true that Israelis and Palestinians don't get to see each other. They see each other all the time. Palestinians are seeing Israelis at checkpoints. They know they're human, they see them there. Israelis see Palestinians in a whole range of contexts too. They read about them, you see them in the news, but how often are you sharing a table with them? And how often are they waking up in the same bunk? And how often are they showering in the same gross showers? Once a week. Maybe a little more. And that's what happens at camp. That's what it is. it's the element of humanizing the other, and it's the element of friendship, frankly, and of a love that grows probably despite of yourself, that allows seeds, that allows campers who come to our programs to sit together in a dialogue session and to listen to each other. And I don't mean listen as in, I'll let you finish your point and I'm already thinking about what I'm going to say so I can counter it, so I can beat you because I've been trained and I have the facts. No, it's listening to the experience of the other person, listening to what they've lived through, and allowing yourself really to sort of let the guard down a little bit. And dialogue is very difficult. I was 14 years old when I showed up at dialogue. I'm from Morocco. I'm many miles away from this conflict, but yet I grew up with a certain, we'll call some stereotypes, we'll call it hatred, or we'll call it plain ignorance, if you will. But I showed up and I had a very difficult time listening to what my Israeli friends had to say. And it's not something that that disappears, This is not like a magic potion here. Let's meet and everything's going to be okay from now on. And I'm still challenged every day. It's challenging for me to even walk into a synagogue and to speak here. And we're talking about Israeli soldiers, and we're talking about very real political things that I feel very strongly about. But the fact that I have Israeli friends that I can turn to and say, hey, I want to know what you think. Or the fact that during the last violence that was happening in Gaza and in the south of Israel, I had a friend, a very dear friend of mine, who wrote me an email and said, I'm on the border, we're about to enter, I just wanted to say that I was thinking of you and this is what's happening. And in my mind I was thinking, are you freaking kidding me? Like, how dare you? This is terrible. I don't agree with what you're doing. I disagree with the policies of the state that you're representing in your uniform, and yet I love you. And so I'm not going to tell you that it's okay that you're shooting and you're dropping bombs, but I am going to be afraid the next time I hear an Israeli soldier has been killed. And I'm going to think of your face, and I'm going to be afraid that it's you. And that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve a world in which people in uniforms are not just people in uniforms. They have a face and they have a name. And the Arabs are more than just the Arabs. They're also people with stories and people with lived experiences that are worth listening to. And that's a constant struggle for me. Still, 11 years as seed, and every day I'm still learning, and every day I try to challenge myself, and it's taken different forms. And I don't know how much time I have, but I want to leave us with an invitation to everyone who's here to think of Seeds of Peace not just as something that's dealing with Israel and Palestine, but it's really a way of looking at the world where we say it's worth it to respect another person. And not just, I know this Latino guy who works in my building, or I know this gay person down the street, and that's enough. No, do you really? Have you asked them a question? Do you know what their experience is? Has your own identity been challenged by your interaction? And if not, then I really invite you to consider whether or not you think of that as a real encounter. Is that a relationship that is equal? Is that a relationship of power? And where do we stand in all of these relationships? And that's something that I try to do every day as a seed. And I fail a lot because it's hard. It's very, very hard. But I know there's support, and I know there are a lot of us who are wishing for this better world. So thank you. Thank you for listening to us. And thank you for doing the hard work of listening.
So, hi, Shabbat Shalom. My name is Tomer, and I'm very grateful that you've had us here, and thank you very much for, Rabbis Jeremy and Irene for having us here, and especially I want to thank you because unlike Alia, I don't get to see Leslie every day, so it's been an incredible experience for me to see her, and I have seen her as a first-year counselor back in 1997, when I was already a veteran, senior camper, who knows the ropes and camp. So I have two things to say. I have to structure myself, otherwise I can go on forever. So one of it is kind of personal, and another one is more kind of academic. So I want to tell you a little bit about what Seeds of Peace has done for me in my life, and secondly, a little bit of what Seeds of Peace, I think, is doing particularly well and exceptionally right. They're right, they were onto something a long time ago, and I think this is a point that has been missed and is still missed in the region and many other areas. So with that brief introduction in mind, I just want to first tell you a little bit about myself. I was a camper, as I said, in 1996 and 97 and 98. I was then a counselor in 2006 and a regional coordinator for Seeds of Peace, and then I was a facilitator in 2010, and basically I've tried to do every possible role in camp. And the reason that I felt like I want to do all these things in camp is because Seeds of Peace has absolutely and unequivocally changed my life like no other experience that I've had. And I don't say that lightly, and I don't say that about many things. And I'm a political science graduate student at Stanford, and I don't think I would have ever had half of the perspective on politics in the world that I do today without the experience of Seeds of Peace. And so I think my first message is you have to understand that Seeds of Peace is primarily an educational experience. It's an educational experience for the people who participate in it because what they get there is an opportunity to be exposed to something that they otherwise don't get at all. So Alia mentioned it, as she said correctly, that Israelis and Palestinians meet and see each other, and 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they were able to meet each other much more often, but they didn't engage in dialogue. They didn't engage in dialogue, and they definitely did not do it in the kind of favorable conditions that they do it at Seeds of Peace. And it was only when I was a facilitator coming back to Seeds of Peace that I realized a little bit about this. So I just want to tell you a little bit from the slightly more academic perspective. There are probably less than 1% of the population of Israelis and Palestinians who get to engage with each other in the kind of favorable conditions. So maybe you hear about a lot of organizations doing PC things and all these things. They reach, including Seeds of Peace, which is a relatively big one, they reach a tiny fraction of the population. And not only do they reach a tiny fraction of the population, I can tell you when I was working as a facilitator in Jerusalem and we reached out as Seeds of Peace to those organizations and we offered them to do facilitation and dialogue in their organization because we did the facilitation course, they said no. A lot of them did. They said, we're just bringing kids to play basketball or soccer or do any other thing. We want them to meet and be friends. We don't want to talk about the issues. We don't want to bring politics in it. That ruins everything. So I have to tell you, Seeds of Peace were right from the start that it's incredibly important to not just bring people together, but also create favorable and equal conditions for them to engage in meaningful dialogue. And that's what I learned as a facilitator at Seeds of Peace, coming back to work. And I can tell you that in my experience, this is something, for example, that American politics lacks. It lacks real dialogue. And what you need, and I think a lot of people don't understand it, you need facilitators. You need to think through and learn a little bit about how to create meaningful dialogue. It is not enough to bring a conservative and a liberal into a TV studio and let them, talk to each other in front of the cameras. That's not dialogue. What you need for dialogue is actually sometimes to turn off the cameras. And you need to bring in people who understand what's going on in both sides. So in Seeds we do, as a facilitator, I was an Israeli and I always had a Palestinian counterpart with whom we planned sessions together. And you need to create safe environments, inclusive environments where people don't dominate the discussion, where the power dynamics of gender and race and other things don't replicate, where the conflict from back home doesn't replicate itself in the dialogue room, so that you can actually open up and share and talk about what drives you and your fears. And I think that, going through that, and I go back to my personal experience, is what has expanded my horizons when I was very young. And that's an experience that very, very few people get back in the Holy Land, back in the region. Very, very few, much fewer than you think they do. They just never get to engage with it. And they never learn to understand those other perspectives. Now, I've learned that even though I've been through that I don't have the tools of seeing the world from the eyes of another by myself. I need to continue be in dialogue, continue talk to my friends, and continue reaching out as reality unfolds and things happen to learn from them. But I also got the tools to be even open to the understanding of that. And I'm very grateful that I've had that experience. So thank you guys for listening and having us here. And I hope that if you take one thing out of this is that meaningful dialogue, as Alia said rightly, is not something that is easy. It is something you need to put in a lot of thought into and facilitate carefully, or otherwise the contact that you get is not necessarily a good thing. Thank you.
So I think we're going to have the opportunity to continue this conversation after services, am I right? So thank you, Tomer, and thank you, Alia, for being with us tonight. They are two of several thousand truly remarkable young and not so young anymore people that I have the privilege of working with on a daily basis, and that I have the privilege of watching grow on their journey from 14-year-old campers in Maine to emerging professionals that are tackling this world, that are engaging thoughtfully, and I believe, and you should believe too, are giving us a reason to be hopeful. So thank you for including us in this conversation.
I really do want to urge all of you to join us for questions and answers, because when Leslie and I talked about this evening, we wanted to go even beyond just a description of experience, but have an opportunity for dialogue with these three remarkable people. And I want to thank the three of you, because what you've modeled for all of us is a way of living that transcends politics and peace processes, that there's a way to be in this world in direct confrontation with reality while also maintaining hope. And so you've been very inspirational for us, and I thank you for being here. Shabbat Shalom, and please join us across the way in the atrium. Important. I will find you if you have a question. So who would like to begin? I'm going to let Peggy Morrison begin.
Bias.
But I'm going to begin. Is this working? Okay. I'm going to begin with a very basic question. Could you describe for us who goes to Seeds of Peace, how they're chosen, how many kids are involved in a session,
Sure.
What is a typical day like,
Okay.
et cetera?
Thank you. Well, let me start with an open invitation. We're in Boston here, which is only a 2.5-hour drive to our camp in Maine. So Jeremy and Carol came to visit us this summer. I know several others at TI have making trips before. We love to show off what happens in Maine. We love for you to come meet Seeds, maybe even have some dialogue as we've been talking about tonight. So as you're thinking about your summer, please think about coming to see Seeds of Peace in action and meeting more of our campers. We are doing usually 2 sessions each summer with about 175 campers each. Our selection process truthfully varies a little bit country by country, but in general we're working with either ministries of education or other community-based organizations that can take the lead on nominating outstanding students in their schools. So we're working very, very closely with schools and school systems and other community-based organizations. We're not shy about the fact that we're looking for people that are on some element of a leadership track. And yes, our kids also have to speak English. The dialogue that you heard Tomer and Alia speak about earlier is rooted in face-to-face communication. So we own that we're missing a segment of the population who don't have access to the English education as others do. But our delegations of young people are incredibly diverse. They're diverse across the socioeconomic spectrum, they're diverse across the political spectrum, and they're diverse across the religious spectrum as well. And that's what they should be for this program to be successful. It's not the case at all that we're sort of selecting pro-peace teenagers to come speak more about peace. It's absolutely not the case. We're selecting young people who are engaged in these issues and who want to represent their people and their countries and make sure that they and their communities have a voice in this conversation. So the math there adds up to about 300 to 350 kids per summer. in 2 full sessions at our camp in Maine. There are now 5,000 graduates, and as I started to mention earlier, Seeds of Peace has obviously grown and adapted in our 21-year history from just a summer camp to, oh, now they went home, and they want to keep seeing each other, and they want to keep learning. We have a very robust regional program, offices and staff in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and Ramallah that are running continual programming that is age appropriate. So it's different for the high schoolers than it is for the 18 to 20-year-old, and then emerges as more of a professional networking and skill building organization in the older 22 plus. And our oldest graduates, you're not quite the oldest, but almost, are now in their mid-30s and as I mentioned earlier, really succeeding in their careers. So
what happens give us a sense of a day.
A day. Honestly, if you walked in off the street of camp, and I hope you will, camp looks, am I right, very much like a regular summer camp. And a day involves a combination of your basic camp activities, bunk cleanup, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, camp assemblies rooted in camp spirit and communication, soccer, basketball, water skiing, swimming, and 90-plus minutes a day in a very focused dialogue session in a group of 16 to 18, a group that stays consistent, stays the same throughout the 3.5-week program, and as Tomer mentioned, a group that is led and facilitated by 2 trained facilitators, almost always an Israeli and a Palestinian pair in our current structure, which we feel very grateful for. And I think there's tremendous value in the balance of really hard dialogue, reinforced with moments later in the day of sharing a meal together or being on the same soccer team and reinforcing, working together in a high ropes challenge on our ropes course, reinforcing all of the aspects that are underpinning to our work of communication and teamwork and trust.
Great. Jeannie? Oh, good. Wow, look at that. I had the same question. Yes.
So after your initial experiences as Seeds, did you find you could impact your families at all? Did you come back with a different view and discuss it with them?
So I always say, and that's my personal experience, but also working with Seeds of Peace and being a regional coordinator, etc., that you become a seed not in camp. You become a seed when you get back home. That's the moment where you're confronted with the fact that what you've been doing in camp for all this time is not the reality. Not reality of life back home, not the reality of your neighborhood. And I grew up in Jerusalem, and I have lived in areas where, and in my school, when I came back and gave a talk about Seeds of Peace to my class, that was not accepted positively by my classmates or my teacher or my school. Even though, as Leslie said, I was selected by the Ministry of Education and went as an official delegation of the State of Israel. That's how I went. But when I came back, I realized that what I came back with did not really match with the reality. So I think this is a really important point. So I think the point about the family generalizes. I don't think that, in my family, and I think in many Seeds families, there are disagreements. There are difference of perspectives, right? And it's true in the United States as well. And in the family, you accept each other in a different way. But I think it's actually really important to understand that, especially since there's such a small fraction of the population who goes through these processes, they go back into a very frustrating, difficult reality on many fronts. And the moment they go back is actually the crucial, critical moment for Seeds of Peace, which is why in Seeds of Peace I've been, and as Leslie knows, and I've been a huge support of the things that she has pushed in Seeds of Peace, to do more than just camp. And in particular, to do the follow-up program in the region that I was very passionate about when I was working for it. Because for me as a teenager, this was my youth movement. I wasn't in the Scouts, and I didn't do any of the other things my friends in my school did. I went to Seeds activities, and that's just become my kind of social after-school support group. So I don't think I've made great strides within my family in many ways. Though I think it's interesting to look at those things over the years, how the ripple effect works. But it's actually very, very important to remember that what we're doing is actually complicating the lives of these young people in various ways. And for some of my friends and some of my campers who went back to live in refugee camps in the West Bank or in Gaza, I mean, it's actually made their life much more difficult in various ways, and they've been very conflicted about it. So I think it's important to remember that, you know, this is a limited effort, and there's a lot more that needs to be done for this to be successful.
Sorry, you want to move on? I know. I just want to add one thing that I mentioned that Seeds of Peace has grown as our seeds have grown and grown as the communities around them as well. And over the past couple of years, we actually established a parents program for Israeli and Palestinian seed parents who were impacted in some way and curious and craving a similar cross-border interaction. And it's been really exciting to watch that happen. It's not the same, obviously. There's a reason why we started with young people, and it's not the same when it happens in the region instead of in a truly neutral setting. But it's been very, very powerful. And actually just yesterday, we learned that we're still working actively in Gaza. We are one of few peace-building organizations that's been able to continue to work there. And just today, we had 38 parents of seeds in Gaza that are going to be crossing into the West Bank next week to participate in this program. So I think that's a testament to the ripple effect that we're after.
Alia, do you want to talk about your family's reaction or no?
You know, I think it's more than just my family, and I think it's not. These are not questions of just this particular issue, and what does my family now think of Israelis, or what does my family now think of Jews. But there's definitely a running joke in my family and within my groups of friends that, you know, if I read the news or if I hear something or if someone says, you know, this grand generalization, there's a sort of moment of humor and of anticipation. All right, here we go. Here's the question. Like, you know, do you really believe that? Have you ever met someone from that group? Why do you think that? Why, like, so for me, I mean, we're certainly more removed than the Palestinians are, and in Morocco, it's very common for you know, like people here say shit, excuse my language. You know, if you drop something or if you burn your hand, in Morocco, the equivalent for that is God cursed the Jews, yeah, right. Whoa, and it's big, and at the same time, it doesn't. It has substance. It's rooted in something. And at the same time, it's really meaningless. And people don't say it thinking that that's what it means, and no one has any awareness that that's what they're saying, but it's so internalized, and it's so part of the culture that it's just said. And my mom does that a lot. And a lot of my Jewish friends have come to visit at home. And she's Skyped with my Israeli friends, and sometimes she'll drop things, and she'll say, and she'll turn to me, she'll say, sorry. And I don't think it's something that she actually means, but I think there's an awareness there. So, shway, we're getting there.
Good. Another question. Yeah. I'm going to do John and then Sarah. How are you funded was the question.
We are funded primarily by individual donors here in the States. We're starting to really focus on opportunities abroad, to be honest with you, but it's not huge, and by a series of government grants as well, United States government, the State Department, the EU, but our operating budget is about $5.5 million a year, and the vast majority of that comes from individual contributors here in the States, and corporations and foundations as well.
I think it's a remarkable program. And can you explain how the dialogue works and give us examples? Because it seems to me that's a model for any kind of conversation where people have different opinions and disagree.
Right. It's something I can talk about at great length, so I'm not going to. But I think the main point, and Leslie touched on it, is that we create a group. And I think that phrase says a lot. So it's two words, process and group. So we do a lot of group building, and we build the process ahead of time. So we have a set number of participants and a set number of facilitators, and nobody else is allowed into the room. And it's mandatory participation. So you can't get no excuses of getting out of dialogue. This is something that the entire schedule of camp in various ways is built around this. So there's a lot of things going on at the soccer field or in the dining hall, but they're all done with a lot of thought of how to make the dialogue room an effective one. And if you come visit camp, which I think you should, it's a really brilliantly beautiful place, you won't be let into the dialogue room because nobody's allowed into the dialogue room, and journalists are not allowed in the dialogue room. And Leslie doesn't come into the dialogue room even as camp director. She does not enter that. That's kind of a safe, sacred space for just the participants and the facilitators. So that's one thing to really, I think it's really crucial about any form of dialogue, is to know who are the observers, who listens in. So we create conditions of confidentiality and safety. Secondly, we do, as I said, there's a process that we take kids through, and it goes from creating relationship and opening up on a very personal level and talking about our identity and who we are, and then trying through that to get to different, more like bigger, more generalized points about the conflicts and positions. And I think that's really important. And what the facilitators do in the group is to challenge the participants. So facilitators' point is, you know, there's like two different things, a lot of things that are happening. In the beginning, kids obviously, and that's true about people actually, not just kids, they don't want to hurt each other. They just met each other. We just want to be nice. We want to be polite. So they don't say anything very meaningful so as to not rock the boat. At that point, you want to challenge them to really open up. And in other points, you want to pull them back because they're not ready to go there yet, or it might threaten the group. So you actually want to push the group toward. So here, the idea is that honesty breaks groups apart. That's kind of the generalized truth. If people say what they really mean and what they really think, this like nice little group that we've created, everybody's here the same, turns out not to be true. We'll uncover disagreements in every group. But we want to be able to do those things and maintain the group as a whole. So we want to unravel those truths one by one, and so that we can process them and digest them as a group. So the point is to challenge them to more honesty when they're being too nice and just playing around. But then when things come up, we give them space as individual and as a group to process it and understand when people stand. So that's kind of like the generalized group dynamics facilitation that I've used since I was trained at Seeds of Peace as a TA at Stanford, and it's just really very, very useful. The other thing that I'm going to tell you specifically about dialogue in camp is that it's really incredibly important for us. The participants go out of camp being able to give you a really good rendition of the narrative that they didn't come with from home. Okay, so, you know, even if they get out of it thinking, they're worse than I expected, and that happens a lot. You get this like nice Jewish Israeli liberal kids who grew up in a house where their parents always talked about peace and how important peace is, and then they never really engage directly with the historical narrative, and then they go to camp and they realize, oh my God, they are angry at us and they hate us and they think we did this and we did this, and they're like, their hopes and dreams for peace are shattered by the cruel reality. So we want those kids as well to learn something, but we want them to go back and be able to, whatever they agree with or not or disagree, they can give you the rendition. They can run you down the narrative pretty well, and the different versions of it and the variants, and be really educated in that regard. So we make sure that at some point or another we touch on like all the most explosive subjects.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Other question?
Could you tell us something? Okay, thanks. Could you tell us something about the details of your selection criteria and mechanism and how that is done?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to generalize. Like I said, it varies a little country by country, and the definition of leadership is obviously vague. But some of the questions on our applications involve how have you been impacted by this conflict? I'm trying to remember this new one. We just redid the Egyptian application as a result of current events, but responding to current events is a really important part of it. Sorry, I'm trying the way that it's a panel. It's a panel of people that are looking for a variety of different skills in young people. Obviously, you need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to articulate your opinion, so the language skills are a part of it. And your view on both your own country, your community, your family, your religion, and this conflict, whatever aspect of the conflict might be for you, are all part of the questions and the conversation. It's not just written, by the way. There's several rounds of interviews and dialogue to preempt, in some ways, the dialogue that will happen when the other and the other delegations are in the room. So I hope that was a little bit of an answer to your question. I realize I'm not in the room. I'm not there in the conversations. I know as we speak there were north of 1,000 Palestinians that had applied through their schools for this summer, and 200 to 300 are being interviewed this week and last week, and these are the types of conversations, few buzzwords on the conflict that they're testing and curious to the reactions to. But as I said, our goal is to really cover the entire spectrum of socioeconomics, politics, and religion.
Hi. Are there countries and communities not yet represented that you would like to see show up, and which countries and communities are they?
What'd you say, Siri? This is Eva, our global program director, in the back, by the way, and there are several other SEEDS counselors and alumni and SEED parents in the room, which it's very special to see you all here, so thank you for coming. Did you say Syria? Is that what you were yelling? Syria. Syria and Lebanon, for sure. And because of our direct relationship with the governments that we're working on, and because of Israel and Syria and Lebanon's non-relationship, that's been a non-starter for us for a really long time. Our founder was very clear that he wanted these young people to come with the direct support of their government. And that has meant a lot, especially in the moments that Tomer referenced earlier of the difficulty of returning back to your communities after having spent 3.5 weeks with the other. So those would be my first answers. I think we're, as an organization, I'll give you my executive director answer, which is that we're really focused on redefining Seeds of Peace as not just the camp, but as a truly long-term and relevant leadership development organization. So for me, that means staying really focused in the regions that we're already committed to, the Middle East and in smaller numbers in South Asia. Lots of people ask us about Ireland and Africa and Armenia, and there are many other conflicts in the world which I have no doubt the Seeds of Peace model can work in. But for the next couple of years, we have our work cut out for us. How's that? In the regions that we're already committed to.
Camp is over, and I'd like to know what sort of relationship you maintain with the campers when it is over, and do you have a percentage of how many are no longer interested after the camp experience? You guys are going to have to come join me on this one. It's a great question, and I don't have a percentage, but I can tell you that we are really focused on catching up in some ways with the earliest years of Seeds of Peace, the years in which, in the early 90s, they didn't have email addresses, there was no Facebook, and our organization is now thriving because of these means. So we've really taken a step back over the past couple years and focused exclusively on our programming for this oldest tier of our graduates. We have some catching up to do, to be honest with you. I shared some stories. I'm very confident in how the Seeds of Peace experience is living on in those graduates, and I speak to many of them personally, but the data, we need to produce more data, and frankly, this peace-building movement needs to produce more data, because there's a lot out there, and there are a lot of organizations in our space that we collaborate with that are doing great work in this vein, but there's not a ton of momentum or statistics behind people-to-people peace-building programs. So I hope you'll invite me back in a couple years and I'll answer this question more articulately. But we have a complex series of regional programmings to address exactly what Tomer mentioned, which is the most difficult aspect of Seeds of Peace, returning home and maintaining both your connections, your relationships, and also your path to leadership. And we feel it's very much our obligation to continue working with our Seeds as long as possible. And it's a hybrid of maintaining their relationships with each other and their relationships within their own communities.
Paul.
I'm curious as to how you balance the encounter aspect of your camp with what we need today in the world is leadership. And what leadership skills, I mean, you only have 3.5 weeks, and how many repeat campers do you have? I mean, how do you even get this idea across in such a short time that they have such a big responsibility that you're looking for them to fulfill?
Great question. Leadership. Hitler ran leadership camps, and people could show up and get skills and go and use them for awful things, to do terrible things. So when we say leadership, we have a very specific definition and understanding of what we mean by leadership. We mean leaders who are equipped with certain values and who believe in respect and who believe in inclusivity and who believe in dialogue and engagement. And there are plenty of leaders who don't, and unfortunately we've seen the history of that, and we continue to see it today, right? And played out in a lot of different ways. So for us, when we say leadership organization, conflict transformation organization, we're not interested just in leaders who are going to go sign the peace agreement. We're interested in leaders who are going to go into their communities and engage in education, and engage through the arts, and engage through business endeavors, but doing so from a set of values that comes from the encounter experience. And this is a little bit what I was trying to say earlier. If in my encounter with someone who's different from me, I don't learn the value of respect, and I don't learn the value of self-awareness and of challenging myself, and of this shared humanity and of the shared future that we have, the encounter was meaningless. And so dialogue sessions at camp and every other activity at camp is really set around these things of, yes, I see you, and maybe you're Israeli or you're Egyptian, and that identity for me represents a whole lot of things that are very scary and that are very foreign, but you're also my friend, and you're also a good basketball player, and you have nice hair or whatever it is. And really it's important because leadership is not just here's how you negotiate, here's how you raise some money, here's how you create a movement, but what are you creating a movement around? And that's what we're trying to do at Seeds. We're trying to really create leaders and to empower. There are a lot of leaders out there, and people are leading others in a lot of different directions, and we want people to lead in directions that are positive and in directions that are inclusive, and in directions that are going to allow for a real peace, not a transactional signed peace agreement, but really a transformation of how communities engage with each other. So the encounter part for me is very much tied in with the leadership part.
Andy?
How do you deal with with Shabbat and the various? How do you deal with the various Shabbats and religious holidays? Are participants encouraged to go to everyone else's? And
so this is Matt Simonson, who's a frequent attendee, I think, here at Temple Israel, and also an 8 or 9 year counselor at Seeds of Peace, who runs not only our Shabbat services each week, but also helps to coordinate all of the other services. This is these are one of these added bonus moments of Seeds of Peace. And while we're not an interfaith organization, we're not focused on faith-based work, this is one of those learning encounter moments that absolutely we're capitalizing on. So it's a delicate balance also between providing the proper worship space and also providing the educational opportunity that exists. But we've under Matt's leadership come up with a really great way of capitalizing on it. We pause our programming every Friday after lunch for Muslim prayer services, every Friday after dinner for Shabbat services, and every Sunday morning for Christian services, and are complementing that with a dialogue on interfaith at least once each session to have these conversations as well. Yes. Ooh, sorry, I don't get that.
Eleanor. Then we'll have one more question.
Hello. I'm interested in the dialogue itself. Is there any chance of giving us a teeny piece of it? Hi. Right into it. Is there any chance of hearing a wee bit of the dialogue itself? I mean, do the kids actually say, your family burnt down our date trees and that?
All right, so I'll tell you about two of my favorite moments from dialogue from when I was a camper, and I facilitated in other spaces as well. The dialogue people often think of as debate, as just a conversation. 1948, let's talk about 1948. Here are the Arabs, here are the Israelis, go at it. And that's not what dialogue is, and that's not what we want to do. We want to create interactions that sort of get at another level and that use other parts of the brain. So dialogue can also be very visual. I remember one of the most powerful dialogue sessions for me when I was a camper was, I think the prompt was illustrate the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF. What does it mean for you? So everyone's drawing on this large piece of paper, and a Palestinian person from my dialogue got up and drew a tank. And then this Israeli guy got up and inside the tank drew a person, like a little stick figure, and then sat down, and then a Palestinian guy got up and drew the part of the tank from which the missiles come out. And then we sat down and it was, all right, let's reflect. What does this mean? And it's another way of engaging in the conversation. It allows for people to bring their own experiences and to say, if you drew that person inside the tank, why? What does that mean for you? What is your family's relationship to this tank? What is your family's relationship to this part of the tank that, has the missile coming out of it? And that's really how you get to the core of stories. Another thing we do at camp is the uni-national dialogues. And people come armed with, I'm going to convince the other side and I'm going to beat them because I'm right and they're wrong. And, I know I'm going to be the one to convince all these people. And so you show up and there are these united fronts, and for a week they're at it like this, and then the facilitator says, okay, for this dialogue session today, I want the Arabs on this side of the room, here's your circle, and I want the Israelis here. And you should see what happens, how it goes down. Economic issues, issues of gender come up, issues of ethnicity, issues of religion, tensions within the own communities that come up. When people come in at the beginning, if we're united against you guys, we're going to be saying the same thing. But the moment we're talking to each other, you're going to see our own issues come up, and it's magical. And it's really interesting to see how when the group comes back together the day after national sessions, where maybe I'm not so buddy with my Palestinian friend anymore because he comes from a cushy lifestyle in Jerusalem, and I grew up in a refugee camp. Or I grew up in Gaza, and he knows nothing of my struggles. Maybe the Israeli kid knows more about my struggle. Maybe they lost someone in the conflict. Maybe they're coming from a similar economic background. So it's also an invitation to really reflect on one's own identity and to not just come in, it's me against you. It's really to see the diversity of the voices that are in the room.
Well, it's hard to follow up. Alia said so many beautiful and true things. You mentioned date trees, and she explained to you about her name earlier, so I feel the need to say that Tomer in Hebrew means a date tree. That's the meaning of the name. So I was just haunted by that. But I just want to say, Alia gave really great examples of what we're trying to do in dialogue, and one of it is, as I said, we want to create like an inclusive and safe environment. Now let me give you asked like a tiny little peek about how it starts. Well, it starts with, as Alia said, there's like one group over here in a line, another group over here in a line. We don't tell them what to sit. They sit there naturally. That's kind of how they huddle together, the Israelis here and the Palestinians here. And they subconsciously appoint speakers. They don't do it really, but there's like one very articulate, usually a guy who has the best English, who's, he won the debate team of his school and whatever, and he's there, and he's going to give it to them. He's going to let them hear them, and he's going to represent. Right? So that's one thing that happens fairly early on. And one of the things that Alia beautifully mentioned is also one of the reasons we take on the binational or the uninational session is because then suddenly you have, for example, one of the girls who would say, you never let me speak. You always shut me down. Why do you do this? When we're in the go. So that's one of the, and often she wouldn't feel comfortable to say that in the larger group. You need to have the separate group for her to come out and say, you never let me speak, you always shut me down, and you make it seem like you're the only one representing my country, and your voice is the only one, while I actually have a different opinion. And I think it's important to experience that, because if you just had the unilateral meeting, you'd never get to experience the feeling of being shut down by the other person. And so that's another thing that we do. We're not teachers, and high school kids are used to teachers. So they come and they sit and they want you to tell them what to do. And the teacher steps in and you do this and you do this and you speak. We don't do that. We let them speak over each other in the beginning, and we let the dynamics, we let some of them get frustrated because they don't get to speak enough, and then we use what we call reflection. So then we say, we've noticed today some people have not been speaking as much as others. Do you think that reflects the space that we've talked about? Or we let them come up with their own ground rules for dialogue, and then they're good students, so they go and write down, we should be respectful to one. They write it down, right? We don't tell them what to do. And then later in the sessions we say, look at what we have hanging on the wall. You said that those would be the rules. If we've been respecting those, but we let them kind of lead themselves. So there's a lot of like non-intervention that we practice as facilitators, and trying to really disassociate. And I want to tell you one other story about my experience as a facilitator. So as a facilitator, one of the hardest things is to take yourself out of the conversation. So, I'm an Israeli. I grew up like being a very active political, person. I'm a political science graduate student today, so I always would read the news and the history and everything. And then you go into the facilitation, and kids come and they say utter nonsense sometimes, or whatever. They make up stuff. They're wrong about the dates, and they say things, your mind is blown sometimes. And again, you want to be the teacher and be like, no, no, that's not true. And there's even a greater, like, you feel responsible over the kids of your side, no, you're embarrassing me. That's not true. Don't represent. One important thing you need to learn is to just disconnect from that. That's not the point. The point is for them to hear each other and learn with all the mistakes and all the messiness and all their perspectives. It's not. So I always say, if you want to learn the history, a dialogue session is not the best way to do that. You don't gather everybody around like a bunch of your friends and say, let's hear everybody's opinions about what happened in history. That's not a good way to learn history. What is a good way is to learn people's perspective and worldviews and how they perceive the world. And later on, when they go and read the history books, they will have a different, more critical edge to it because they will understand, they will ask themselves, who wrote this history book and what was their perspective? And the kids, and that's unfortunately very true still today, at home, at school, they don't get very variegated perspectives. Their history books are terrible. It's true in Israel. I know you hear a lot about the incitement in the Palestinian Authority and whatever. The history books that my nieces are learning from are terrible. They're really just terrible. And I think, from what I've seen in the United States, it's not much better in certain schools. So I just think unless you get some critical edge to understand, okay, this is what I'm learning at school, but I'm going to go look for other things in the afternoon and ask my family and my teachers. I think that's what you learn in dialogue.
Great. One last question.
You ready? Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready. Okay. I've got to remember what the question was now. That it sounds terrific for 3.5 weeks, and if I had young children, I would certainly encourage them to go there. I would like to know, though, after you learn all these things that you're talking about, what happens then to the support that I think I would need to keep my perspective going in the direction that I'm learning about when I'm in the camp?
Listen, it's hard to come to camp, and it's even harder to go back home. And because camp is safe, camp is a physically safe environment, and conversations at camp can happen in a safe space, a safe emotional space, because of facilitators like Tomer who really create that space. You go back home, not you, I went back home, I'll own it. I went back home and I was like, what do I do now? How do I keep engaging in these conversations? Do I want to change the people around me? Do I feel like I'm ready to do that? I'm still struggling with certain issues, and it's really a lifelong journey, I think, to all the seeds that you'll talk to. The way it plays out in Israel-Palestine is exceptionally difficult because the campers will go back home. They have 3 years of what we call follow-up programming, junior seed programming. And so it'll be seminars, workshops, meetings, overnights, and it'll be a whole, wide range of things. We're partnered with Harvard Law School. They do a training every year on negotiation, mediation. So they teach the kids skills in that sense. We'll do meetings where, there's a dialogue component, but maybe it's focused a little bit more on the history of Jerusalem or the situation of water in Israel and the West Bank. So that'll be more towards the understanding. And the relationships, which is really the third pillar of our work, as I was saying earlier, are really part and parcel of all the work, right? In speaking with you, I'm building a relationship, and so Seeds of Peace staff is aware of that in every program. For the 3 years after camp, all is well, programming is happening. Some people drop off because they're more interested in sports or whatever, but they're around and they have the opportunity. They hit 18 and the Israeli kids go to the army. And by law, they're not allowed to meet with Palestinians. And the Palestinians go to university, and for the last 3 years, they've been able to defend their work, and they've been able to say, we do this and it's meaningful because, listen, just yesterday I was telling a kid about the family, my family history around 1948 and how my grandfather was killed and all these things. And listen, I'm changing it from the inside, and we're building this new community and whatever. And then when they hit 18, there's a disillusionment there because I was just friends with you for 3 years and now you're in the army. And immediately the power dynamic is like this. And chances are tomorrow when I'm crossing a checkpoint, that you're going to be standing there with a gun and I'm not. And what does that do for our friendship? And I just invite you to look at your friends who are sitting here next to you. Imagine that dynamic. Imagine that situation where suddenly they have institutional power over you. They're in a military and you're not. And by law, they can't speak to you, and yet you just shared this love and you just shared these experiences for 3 years. It's very, very, very difficult. And we've gotten better over the years doing programming for those seeds, who we now call senior seeds, the Palestinians on their own, dealing with the issues that they're facing internally, and the Israelis on their own as well. And our hope and our belief is that, so to speak, the seed is planted enough that when you come out and you're 22, 23, the Israelis go to university and the Palestinians are sort of starting in their careers. 14, 15, those are formative years. And for a lot of people, I won't say a lot. For some people, okay, it was nice, it was lovely, but that was idealistic, and I was younger then, I didn't know better. And for a lot of people, there comes a moment where it's like, no, I remember why that meant something to me, and I remember, and now I'm smart, and I'm able, and I'm empowered to look at my situation, my reality, and to think back to those 3.5 weeks where I was challenged in these ways that are really unique, and now I want to make a change, and you'll see people slowly come back into the community. And we don't consider, involvement with Seeds of Peace activities as our success. That's not what we're looking for. We're not trying to have this be insular. Everyone comes back and, we're here in the nest. No, go spread these ideas, go spread this awareness. And when we look at impact and when we look at success, it's not just people working, Israelis with Palestinians or Palestinians with Israelis. It's also working internally on issues. So if a Palestinian does what we call a community dialogue inside their town in the West Bank, and they deal with religious tolerance, for example. That's something that for us, that's amazing. You're hosting a space, you're leading conversations that are otherwise difficult, and that lead to this peace that we want to see, that's both internal and external, right? So the United States is technically at war with all these people out there, and no one here has to engage with it, but in our own backyards, there's stuff that we have to deal with. And the same thing on the Israeli side. So I think it's really an experience that is difficult, and only gets more difficult. And what we try hard on the staff side to do is to continue providing support. And then at one point to say, this is what we've done, what are the issues that you care about, and how can you engage your world, and how can you make a difference now that you're sort of empowered with these tools.
Excellent. Thank you. And Leslie, thank you for coming home for the night. And bringing your good friends and colleagues. It's been such a treat to have you with us. Thank you. Please come back. And also, all of you need to come back week after week, but in particular, 4 weeks from now, we'll have another product of Temple Israel here. Lee Rodenberg will come, who lives in Tel Aviv presently, and she'll talk about her work and her experiences in the the Tel Aviv arts and culture scene there. So come back for that. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.